All right, here it is, guys. Mark is not going to be here. I know everyone's here to hear Mark, but our Bavarian friend, as he told us, is in Ukraine right now, and that's all I can tell you. That's all I can tell you. He's saving the world.
You think what's his name? Zelensky's media icon. Well, when I'll be like, oh my gosh.
Every fucking footage of Zelensky, there's Mark in the background.
Just frowning.
Just frowning, barefooted, just like a angry hobbit that got lost. Cool. Enough about
So there's not going to be as much, intensive
input.
background. It's just going to be us kind of
Being amazed. Yeah, that's true.
Socrates isn't here, just the interlocutors who are just saying, like, by God, Zeus. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What do they call them in Greek plays? Like, I guess that's what it is. The interlocutor that just exclaims things that are happening that are not you're not seeing. Yeah, I don't know. Unfortunately, he's using pain. Love to have him. Okay, so let's start this. Land privatization in Europe. We talked about a lot of stuff. It's a long chapter. There's a lot of shit going on. This one is called, so this part of this chapter, the chapter is called, as we said, Accumulation of Labor and the Degradation of Women. And now subchapter, Land Privatization in Europe, Production of Scarcity, the Separation of Production to Reproduction, which is kind of the theme from here on out, but she keeps going back and forth here. Okay, so she says here that what year are we in? We're still in the 16th century, even though we're going up. So enclosures are going up, which is the reduction of commons and expansions of private holdings, which are kind of the kind of baby beginnings of private ownership. And then you have the dispositions of churches at this time. We're kind of moving towards that the West filial kind of historical demarcation. So also the church is losing a lot of land, as you can see. I mean, churches, and they do that all the time, of course. Look at Utah or the Vatican. Okay, so the theme is land privatization, and here she says, she makes this claim here that the accumulation of these lands does not lead to prosperity, actually the opposite. And it as it does in kind of the Marxist theory of history, it is also redoing certain social relations and certain material realities, right? So we are still in that transition, and markets are becoming more and more prominent in this era. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my opening on this.
Yeah, I think the land privatization fits in with a lot of these issues. You both have people forced to now cut off from their means of subsistence and sell their labor on the market. Thus, combined with the free market, they have access to those foods. If they're working, if they go to the city and work, they can still buy food. They're paying in rent.
Yeah, so kind of that wage labor is, yeah, it's definitely married to this privatization of the land. And she's saying, yes, I'm focusing mostly on Europe. This book is mostly a European history. There's she's not hiding a ball here, but she's also claims that this is also an international phenomenon. Of course, this is in the encomiendas and stuff under the Spanish. This is happening in what is going to be called Latin America and Africa, and these are kind of colonial. I would put them as like a feudalization of colonial lands, right? You go and you kind of organize these people in a certain type of slavery that is also feudal. It's kind of a mixed capacity here. And she says here in that same paragraph, I define all these forms as land expropriation because even when force was not used, the loss of land occurred against the individual or the community's will and undermined their capacity for subsistence. Two forms of land expropriation must be mentioned: war, whose character changed in this period, being used as a means to transform territorial and economic arrangements, and religious reform. Cool. Um, um, yeah, so let's talk about this change in military. She says here these often she's talking about European warfare in the 15th century going into the 16th century. These often took place in the summer to give the peasants who formed the bulk of the armies the time to sow their crops. Armies confronted each other for long periods of time without much action. But by the 16th century, wars became more frequent and a new type of warfare appeared, in part because of technological innovation, but mostly because the European states began to turn to territorial conquest to resolve the economic crisis, and the wealthy financiers invested in it. And this is kind of, I think, a kind of another one of those Marxist history. It appears a lot, this idea that war changed because of the fact of now having these semi-cosmopolitan, mercantilists who now have a certain interest. There's not, of course, that developed state yet, but they make these interests known in their polities. And nevertheless, there's kind of these pre-state entities that are in Europe are also having to now that people are moving in, now that they're starting to have economies, with economies come like state interests and population interests, and those cause conflict because natural resources, land, all these things are suddenly seen as scarcity, right?
And people too, conquering new people. War, I mean, that's what I was thinking before you said that, that war
Yeah.
went from being this kind of exercise and regal kind of pompousness and
Yeah.
a lot for show,
A
or
lot of
even for,
taunting.
not that it wasn't violent or couldn't be, because I'm thinking about Napoleon as a kind of example of maybe an older fashioned war versus these, what she's talking about is like wars that we might be more familiar with that are kind of necessitated by capitalist kind of drives, that we have to go to war with this place because they have some rare earth material or something that we need.
Yeah, but the Napoleon thing would be
Kind of lead.
later because she's still in the
But
16th century.
Yeah, Napoleon's later, but it's almost like a throwback to, he's not like you're, it's an
Oh,
actual
I
nation
see.
state. He's trying to build an empire versus this is economies and more of like corporate forces pushing war.
Right, right. No, okay. Yeah, I see. Yeah,
And I think,
yeah.
yeah, too, people and being like tying it to this, one of the themes of the book is that reproduction, the control of reproduction.
Yes, yes. Specifically, the reproduction of people who then have to increasingly so sell their labor as a commodity unto itself. Yeah. Yeah, then there is kind of particularities here about France and whatnot. And then I have here, my notes, I'm moving to the 16th or 17th century again. You have this idea that even contracts change since open fields are abolished and communal, and you're going to communal to individual. Suddenly, excuse me, the form of contracts themselves deal with individuals and their masters. So you're also see the beginning of this atomization. And here I have a paragraph here. Go
Well,
ahead.
on that, I was going to say, because the structure is changing from a feudal one where you rely on your local lord to provide protection,
Mhm.
to now you're an individual, or you're starting to become an individual under the eyes of the law of the state or the law.
Yeah, the state is still kind of a nation state, proto state. Yeah, but it's really weird this time. So yeah, there are people like making contracts and it's still with the kind of feudal lords and their aristocrats, right? Because you're still out in the field. I mean, we're talking about not the urban population right now. But yeah, you suddenly start to have contracts and having wages for your work. Yeah, so kind of the nature of relations is changing. And here she says in the book, I have this whole part covered. Maybe I'll just read a little bit. She says, briefly put, the argument proposed by the modernizers from all political perspectives is that the enclosures boosted agricultural efficiency and the dislocations they produced were well compensated by a significant increase in agricultural productivity. It is claimed that the land was depleted, and if it had remained in the hands of the poor, we peasants, it would have ceased to produce, anticipating Garrett Harding's tragedy of the commons, while its takeover by the rich allowed it to rest. Coupled with agricultural innovation, the argument goes, the enclosures made the land more productive, leading to the expansion of the food supply. From this viewpoint, any praise for communal land tenure is dismissed as nostalgia for the past, the assumption being that agricultural communalism is backward and inefficient, and that those who defend it are guilty of an undue attachment to tradition, i.e. romanticism. I mean, look, the argument is, I guess, correct. I mean, from the point of view of the modernizer, like if your philosophical assumption are, if your kind of value judgments are informed by certain concepts, sentiments, and notions that are skewed towards efficiency and productivity, then yes, the commons are unproductive because they're people like, because people are not talking about production in the sense of like, oh, I have to, make the most powerful seed that like makes the most powerful work, and gotta work more and produce it, but none of this is for anyone. It's not even for me, it's just for my boss to take it to the international market and sell it. Yeah. And then rightly so, the person who vouches for that or supports that comes off as romantic. Yeah, I don't know. From
Yeah,
that perspective, it seems yeah, right.
yeah. I was going to say the same thing. Even if it is more efficient, in whatever sense, how is that like a justification for displacing people?
Wait, what you're saying? What is
Like how, even if it is more efficient in whatever sense, like how is that a justification for displacing people? And yeah, the efficiency comes in terms of the biopolitics or the kind of land. I'm thinking of like Heidegger question concerning technology is kind
Oh
of
yeah.
parceling out of the land and judging it by how many resources you can extract from each square unit.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's you just I've been reading so much Hannah Arendt, this coming to me like that this theme constantly. I feel like it's all my reading, this idea of like this technological perception of life world that is developing at this time. And it's I mean, it's maybe the first time that you read like Malthus, it sounds weird and strange and cruel, but you're given enough like philosophical studies on the right things, and you're like, of course Malthus would come out at the end of this. Like it was just like a matter of time, and then you find out he wasn't the only one that was making those kind of value judgments on the world. Not value judgments, those like computational judgments on the world, which are, I guess,
Yeah,
value judgments.
extrapolative arguments.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that still comes up. There's still, well,
Oh,
nowadays in the
yeah.
left, it's, I think the general idea is that it's kind of eco-fascist in general, and overpopulation isn't necessarily the problem, it's distribution. But I mean,
Mhm.
I'm thinking of a couple of sci-fi books from, well, they're from the 70s, but one became Soylent Green, which is called Make Room by Harlan Ellison. And then one was Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner. And they both come at from different angles. Like, this is bad. The John Brunner one definitely takes it a more modern leftist take, that it's not necessarily the number of people, but capitalism. And it's actually an amazing book.
Yeah.
That's very of like neoliberalism now. But yeah, Malthus. I read him.
Yeah. And I think he should probably certainly pop up in this book down the line. Yeah,
Yeah, it
and
seems like now they're like, the drive is to make more people, and then eventually they'll have to kind of slow that down, and Malthus would be arguing kind of. But it seems almost that there's like, with the church at least, there's this kind of momentum that isn't gonna slow down anytime soon when it comes to reproduction.
yeah, there is and seriously, like we saw it in our time. I mean, I see it, like in Iran, I mean, beginning of the revolution when I was born, was telling people, it's like, hey, you gotta have kids, please. There's an 8-year war going on. We're running out of men, but then you get to the 90s, and of course, when men go out, women naturally gain more freedom, and they kind of carve out economic and political power in their absence, and then they come back, and then suddenly women don't want, like, a lot of, especially urban women, they don't want to have 5 kids, right? 1, 2, 3, and then I want to follow my career, and I got aspirations aside from motherhood. So then, by the time the state, sometimes it works when the state wants you to slow down, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think
China has this problem all the time.
I think that one of the arguments that I'm most sympathetic to is probably that if you give women more control over their bodies, things will eventually level out, because not everyone wants to have children. There are oftentimes women are prevented, or people with uteruses are prevented from having children.
Yeah.
But I think often they're forced to have more children than they would want.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it is.
Ideology or economic conditions.
Yeah. No, and it has a severe kind of psychological results on people, even in the form of shame or guilt.
Yeah, and from reading this book, there was a time when women had more control over the reproductive sphere in the society, and it can be managed pretty fine from what she's saying. So I say go back to that. If we go back to that,
Yeah, I guess then, I mean, we'll get to that actually by the end of this chapter, right? I mean, part of that is that even like on, in the horrendous hell of like Barbados plantations, you have women that are living in slavery. I mean, that's just that the brutality of it. But then there are communities also. There are other women, there are other people. Even you start like exporting. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, like white women into these the white woman criminals from Europe into these islands, and they immediately like just kind of like go into those communities and form communities, which then she's saying like, hey, have kids, like I need more plantation workers. Like, fuck no, like of course you can, use rape or coercion and achieve that end, but not out of volition.
Yeah,
but today is very different. Today with discipline and propaganda and patriarchal use of biopolitics, you can achieve that same end. Except people think they're making decisions.
Yeah.
Oh, I just love having 8 kids come out of me,
and someone might, I don't want to, but a Mormon woman or something, I'm a little more suspicious of someone who is,
okay, deal.
under extremely patriarchal conditions. But yeah, I do want to go back to the nostalgia for the past thing, but yeah, I was going to say too that once she talks about that, and it's pretty stark moment, like when the U.S. Cuts off the slave trade or bringing in new enslaved people, all of a sudden, then now they're all about reproduction and control of having the women get pregnant.
Right.
Yeah, with the nostalgia for the past line, thinking about people who praise the communal lands and this time. I don't know if it's been mentioned by us or in the book that they also worked a lot less than people do to reproduce themselves.
Yeah.
And and I'm not saying, and I don't think it, I think it's just kind of, well, it's a kind of
statement of fact.
Kind of just a shallow claim, and it's this kind of idea that we had to suffer to get here, when who's really benefiting from it more, or like that's, it's kind of childish to think that you could live like this and you have to grow up and work.
Yeah, right. No, you're right. I mean, I mean, yeah, it's a weird argument because you're like, sometimes you're talking about the past and people are like, yeah, why don't you go there? But I mean, there's cliches of it's throughout all the history. I mean, like in the Bible, like in the right in the beginning, like
But people who are like, oh, you should do something because it's in the Bible, aren't claimed to have nostalgia for the past. Like people say you can't have gay sex because it's like, oh, you're just being a romantic,
Yeah, right.
just strategically used with some groups.
That's true. But right up there in the beginning of Genesis, like the punishment of people comes, especially women, becomes working, right, toiling the land, as going out of getting kicked out of Eden. It's right there that you have to now like work on the land to produce that things that you need. So, and then the fact that that text has spoken to a lot of people for so long seems to me to imply that those concepts were meaningful, right? I think as soon as a religion loses its meaning, it either like radically changes or just escapes out of history. And it happens all the time. Like there's a religion that's mentioned in the Quran, which is the latest of these books, and we have no idea who the fuck these people are. But the Quran keeps like naming them next to Christians and Jews. Anyways, just making a point that the very fact that some of these sentiments against work exist seems to me a long human tradition and awareness of what sensitivity to it, that it ought not to be
Yeah,
the only thing you do
not ideal.
that define
But
you.
I think that story, or the Genesis story, is used in connection with this. Like, reason why you're working, you have to work and toil in the fields, laborer, peasant, is because you fell, because of original sin. No, never mind that I, the aristocrat, am not working in the fields.
Yeah, I don't work at all,
So
actually.
they kind of like use that, just like in the way we talked about capitalism, kind of like gloms onto things and brings it into itself, much like Christianity has done in the past.
Yeah. I invite people to go read. I mean, this is later on, but read all of Jane Austen's book. See if you find something work. You know, it's just like people just chilling in the mansion and field.
Not many people reading in Jonathan Strange.
Oh yeah, there you go. Oh fuck, I love that fucking book. It's just I read Jonathan's that book in such like an important moment in my life. It was like really touched me. Okay, so meanwhile, so we've been talking about the fields and the peasants, but this book, this book really, the way it's written really reminds me of Graeber, because you're constantly moving geographically and in time, and it's sometimes hard to say. It's like, because how my mind thinks, it's like very with the locomotive of fucking time, but it confuses me. So she says, and I've written some notes, of course my pages are not going to help, but it says, in towns, there are towns wherein guilds and artisans hold dominion, especially in these kind of markets, these that are just kind of on the periphery of the nation, on the state. And I'm again using that very loosely, because the notion of that we use as state is post-Napoleon. The mercantiles are these are kind of the proto-capitalists, but they're antagonistic. It's as a Marxist, we make this mistake a lot of kind of clustering the mercantile and the capitalists together. They're not actually. The mercantilism was a mode of existence that was antagonistic to capitalism. It's a different form, it's a different social relation. And capitalism, of course, grew out of its antagonism, but it's not the same thing. And they're not around anymore. That's why you don't see, because the nature of markets have changed. Anyway, so mercantiles utilize cottage industries, putting out domestic to draw cheap labor from the newly liberated. Religion gives way to economic activity, and the college industries are individuated. So the college industries, cottage industries, which turn into college industries, right? Later on, where you sit as an individuated individual and produce work. But yeah, so this is important. Cottage industry here. So okay, like think about those fields that these peasants are working, and now maybe the land has been bought, or they're there, they're paying rent, if they have their houses, and these mercantiles, they come, of course, they don't go to city, they go outside the city to the peripheries of cities and make those, again, contracts that we mentioned earlier with individuals. And these contracts are usually with the men of these, and you start to have households as the nature of these kind of work changes, and we'll get to that. But cottage industries, right? They go to these households and they say, "Hey, do X, Y, and Z for a contract." You become kind of a, what do we call Uber drivers and stuff? An early version of, sorry,
gig worker.
Yeah, this is early versions of gig worker, highly exploitative, and religion. I mean, if you know and have read the theologies of Martin Luther and stuff, you understand the importance of that work.
Who hasn't, right?
Right. Yes. I think everybody's wasting their lives like us. So
you nail something on a door, I'll read it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a promise.
He was, yeah, he was the grad student that would not leave. I'm very familiar with with this subject. Yeah, so that is and the enclosure. Yeah, then okay, so now we're are we at the does she jumped in the Jacqueline? Let me read this page real quick. So okay, so well maybe we need to get to this. I don't know. Actually, you say is there anything you want to
I'm trying to
say?
find where you are, because we were at, because she talked about the argument um against the commons, and then
Okay.
says, and we were like, well, those arguments don't they fall apart just on their own considerations, or even if they do hold, it doesn't really fly. But she
Yeah.
says the arguments don't hold, and kind of gives reasons, kind of more historical information about the efficiency of the land.
Okay.
And
Yeah, if you want to go through those, I'm fine.
no, I was
Yeah.
just seeing where we are, and then
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Yeah.
and I was trying to find where you were.
Yeah, okay. So I did the cottage industry now, which is the put out system, and maybe I can direct you with the footnotes. This is footnote 32. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I moved to where footnote 35 is, and that paragraph starts in England. Anti-enclosure struggle began in the late 15th century and continued throughout 16 and 17. You see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, when leveling, enclosing hedges became the most common species of social protest and the symbol of class conflict. I remember like reading that Manning that's cited there, and one time you and you and Lindsay out at our house, and this is when Sean was about to kind of take a break from his skull for a little bit, and yeah, and I was like in a very rare form, and I was keep like trying to tell you about this thing, and it was such a bizarre kind of situation. Anyways, but I remember that in this very correctly. So it's a the level. So this is a movement that actually goes down and takes down barriers, right? You make barriers, these guys put it down, and it has this kind of double speak, right? It's kind of a metaphysical critique of enclosing of the land, but it's also a physical manifestation. It's a praxis of sort. And she's saying that this went on to the 17th century, and of course you even see it in the Jacobin era, where the first uprisings are peasant uprisings. But before we get to that, there's also it's a book about the situation of women here. She says here, one paragraph down, two paragraphs down, the paragraph that starts with this strong female. So she says this strong female presence has been contributed to the belief that women were above the law. No, let's not read that. Next paragraph. Okay, women were also less mobile on the account of pregnancies and caring for children, a fact overlooked by scholars who considered the flight from servitude through migration and other forms of nomadism the paradigmatic form of struggle. Nor could women become soldiers for pay, though some joined armies as cooks, washers, prostitutes, and wives. By the 17th century, this option too vanished as armies were further regimented and the crowds of women that used to follow them were expelled from the battlefield. And then two more paragraphs after that, and I'll pause after this, I promise. With the demise of the subsistence economy that had prevailed in the capitalist in pre-capitalist Europe, the unity of production and reproduction, which has been typical of all societies based on production for use, came to an end. as these activities became the carriers of different social relations and were sexually differentiated. In the new monetary regime, only production from market was defined as value creating activity, whereas the reproduction of the worker began to be considered as valueless from an economic viewpoint and even ceased to be considered as work. Reproductive work continued to be paid, though at the lower rates when performed for the master class or outside the home. But the economic importance of the reproduction of labor power carried out in the home and its function in the accumulation of capital became invisible, being mystified as a natural vocation and labeled women's labor. In addition, women were excluded from many waged occupations, and when they worked for a wage, they earned a pittance compared to the average male wage. Okay, I've read a lot. We're still in the same kind of 300 year era, but this is kind of more individuation is really kind of destroying the modalities through which women were not so differentiated from their counterparts, for one, but were, like you said, kind of wielded more domestic and economic power, even though even the domestic and private wasn't such a defined category for the peasants, right? I mean, upper class, sure, but yeah.
Yeah, but I want to get back to the beginning of where you
Please.
quoted, or where
Yeah.
you started to quote it, but yeah, because she's saying that women had a really strong presence in these anti-enclosure riots, and some historians thought it was because of this kind of protection that women got from the law by not really being considered persons.
Oh shit! I
and
should have.
their husbands, but she rejects that, saying no, women had more of a stake in this, and then showing what actually happened subsequently. As you pointed out in that quote, yeah, women were more negatively impacted by the enclosures because as soon as land was privatized and monetary relations began to dominate economic life, they found it more difficult than men to support themselves, being increasingly confined to reproductive labor at the very time when this work is being completely devalued.
Yeah, right. No, that's I should have read that. It's very important. You're right, because she's talking about this kind of mistaken evaluation of historical phenomena, right?
Mm-hmm.
I see this actually today a lot, especially
Yeah, I was
for kind
going to
of the
say,
men's right. Yeah.
and people say, oh, or any marginalized group, like, oh, they are, going beyond what they need, or they're getting some kind of protection. That's why they can go out and riot or do whatever.
Yeah.
When really they're doing it because they are aware that, they're going to be at the, the
It's
first one
desperation.
being screwed over by whatever change is happening.
Yeah, right. I mean, and you see this. Actually, I was hearing this stupid fucking joke on YouTube the other day. This guy was like, "Oh yeah, women like they start asking for equality after we did all the hard process of history." And aside from being like the stupid shit you ever heard, but let's entertain it like with this text. Like she's saying that a lot of times protected means like we studied in international law actually. Like the people who are protected are the people that are less free usually because they're legally under a more capable unit or subject, right? So a lot of times in like kind of jurisprudence of war, right? Like like women and children, don't kill women and children, don't kill the old and the sick. Well, what are these categories? Oh, they're all dependent categories within these societies. So it's not a sign of freedom when these people, like everybody, they have interests, they join movements, they express themselves politically, but the law might be more lenient on a one, someone that perceives to be a woman of the same age as you, but there is a presumption that there will be discipline under the protectorate in another sphere, right? Like the state or the church is or whatever social power structure at work is what you may call it when you you're sending your work offshoring or whatever you outsourcing, sorry, not offshoring, outsourcing. Yeah, like you're
That's
like, hey,
money, offshore bank accounts. Put your money.
oh right. Yeah, I'm very tired today. Yeah, so it's outsourcing to another unit that he has imbued with more power to do its work for free, right? Yeah. And what about the part after that? I guess you're, oh yeah, that even some of the kind of things we were talking about prostitution and these sorts of work are becoming more regulated, right? Even their spheres are closed. So yeah, women can't just follow armies as fake domestic partners or.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's like that line that the oldest profession. Well, not really. It was kind of like forced upon. Or, yeah, I don't know what like maybe the history before this of sex work.
I mean,
But I
also
think that's
like
another thing
in
we were
what
talking about last week.
sense?
I think that's another thing like we were talking about last week, like throwing the present economic conditions into the past and saying, well, people living on,
We're doing
the
this.
African savannah who first evolved were probably, exchanging things just like we do and thinking in terms of money and selling themselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very different. I mean, think about some kind of temple ritual where, I'm not questioning the fact that it's, sexist or rather it's oppressive that, yeah, like sexual ritual, especially, it's part of this. We're 2,000 years ago in let's say in like in south of modern day Baghdad or something, a temple. Yeah, you go up and you have sex with these women that are some sort of priest or something. And yes, there'll be oppression in that. Yes, there'll be maybe even monetary compensation in the form of like, oh, the god that you priestess for is now, getting all this patronage, which increases your power. That all may be, and yes, like you might have the form. It might actually have the. I'm not gonna say form, but the presence of like modern day prostitution or some sort, or it might overlap with certain activities we understand. But as a whole, it will be a whole different things. And I just don't think you can say, right, like, oh yeah, prostitution goes forever. Well, no, prostitution is a very specific form of selling your body in a wage labor society, right, as an exchange. Yeah.
And it's very devalued. Like
Very
you mentioned,
devalued, of course.
it
Yeah.
wasn't always like I don't think that role, I don't want to say job, but that role in whatever context, or like just like, well, sexual mores and things are being shaped here too by the church. So,
Yeah.
little polyamory or being, just a little like slut shaming is something that came out of this whole thing. And before that, I don't know, but I don't think it was as looked down upon.
Yeah, or it might have happened in other instances, right? And yeah, and I guess you're talking about who and where, but I guess, I mean, what you're kind of touching on is, yeah, what we read early on about this idea that you have to keep women to reproduce for free. like that's that becomes like the cosmological goal of Europe, in a sense, the power structures of Europe to create more
That's
babies.
yeah, to finance capitalism, you have to, you can't, there's no
To
such thing
give
as a
birth to
free lunch.
capitalism.
You
Yeah.
can't make all this money without all this free influx of labor.
Yeah.
Well, not just reproduction, but slavery, colonialism tie into that too, of course.
Yeah, and we saw, in up until the 14th century, we got 400 years of a lot of wars and plague and misery and clashes and failed economic developments and famines, and which will go on in the huge peasant wars, as we saw with the Munster. Yeah, like we need a lot. I mean, they thought to see they needed a lot of bodies to kind of give birth to the next moments of history. I'm sure. I mean, of course, they're not sitting down and being like, "We got to bring out capitalism," right?
Yeah.
No, but the constraints within the historical development is encouraging.
Yeah, and if you're working men to death, you need get the women to take care of them,
Yeah.
force them to kind of help, because that whole aspect of reproduct in the more Marxist sense of reproducing the laborer, and makes
Yeah.
me think of, who was it? It was either Thoreau. I don't want to like slander the wrong one, but Thoreau or Emerson. I think we talked about this in school once, about how he wrote this thing about living in the woods, but he had
Oh, Walden.
yeah, Walden. He had
Yeah.
a woman come and bring him sandwiches and tea all the
Or
time, and stuff.
yeah, it's she's like yeah, a man with a lot of fucking education and a career in land spectator and land spectator, land speculator. Yeah, that goes like for a couple of years, living in a pretty nice cabin and plays like LARPing as whatever fuck that book is about. Thoreau or whatever, and I really like Skinner's Walden too. Actually, that would be a book to read as sci-fi. Yeah, right. But then the kind of the missing story is that the man is being like provided for and he's being kind of cared for. Yeah,
That's a book to write, just like her day-to-day life.
yeah, this
Talking crap about this
delusional
guy.
failed philosophy
Or
grad
that would make a
student.
great sitcom, because sitcoms always have like the man child and then the competent woman,
Mhm.
into like an NBC sitcom. Great.
Yeah, that would, it would make a wonderful play. To be fair, like it's to be
Yeah, a
honest.
play you could definitely go more radical or subversive, because sitcoms do also tend to like support or reinforce the
The
sexual
structure you're critiquing.
yeah.
Yeah, to keep to keep the show going. And yeah, I think like a play in 3 act where you have like Walden's house and you just can't see inside, but I'm already writing this in my head. That was so
Yeah, that's what
good.
the acknowledgements.
Yeah, unless you write first. Yeah, so near the end of this section, she goes on to say, this is 2 paragraphs above where it says the price revolution and the pauperization of the European working class, the next section. She says here, and this paragraph starts with also, but I'm going to skip the first line. She said, it was not workers, male and female, who were liberated by land privatization. What was liberated was capital. And as the land was now free to function as means of accumulation and exploitation rather than as means of subsistence, liberated were the landlords who now could unload onto the workers most of the cost of their reproduction, give them access to some means of subsistence only when directly employed When work would not be available or would not be sufficiently profitable, as in times of commercial or agricultural crises, workers instead could be laid off, left to starve. And you already touched on this idea that like there's like there's enough people to kind of push through this machine, which is the same narrative that she later on depicts about the plantation. At first you're like, yeah, man, cheap slaves, let's fucking get them, let's work them to death. And then you realize that, oh, there needs to be a mode of management. You need to reproduce this system. Or better yet, teach them to reproduce it with minimal discipline. Yeah, anything before we go to the next section?
No, just seems like this kind of set the stage, or primitive accumulation has kind of done its thing. The
Yeah.
land is liberated from the people, people liberated from their means of subsistence. Yeah, and women are liberated from productive labor.
Yeah. And kind of the model I have here is like you have the production, which is male and female. Reproduction that is kind of pushed towards just female, and it has no value, less value. We already seen it's like the reproduction starts to just like drop in value. Production still has value. The man goes, he works, but it's enough. And then the reproduction has to kind of parasite off of the value that is produced off of production, whatever portion of it the worker is getting, right? Which we less, but the kind of thing, what's most important about this relation is that the woman becomes wholly dependent on the male figure.
Yeah, and going back to that whole thing about why the original idea of why there were more women, a lot of women in the riots, and because they weren't persons under the law. Now they are persons and equal to the law, but so dependent on another person that they're really even less free, paradoxically, than when they were not considered a person.
Yeah, of course, yeah, and part of their
Not because of their legal status per se, but
Mhm.
because of their economic conditions, or like the economic structure.
Yeah, right. I mean, as this mode becomes more refined, of course, and this is what I'm kind of writing for classes right now. As far as when we get to bourgeois law, right? Especially as it becomes more refined in 20th century, I mean, it becomes essential for the law to present its subject as equals, right? I mean, capitalism has that. It's like, hey, you and your boss, you're the same people. You same laws applies to you than to him, and you're and the women, yeah, same laws. But we know this to be otherwise because the actual structure of uh, labor and value creation, these are highly exploitative. And of course, when you're not even in that, you're outside of it, you're at home, you're in this private fucking prison being exploited. You're even less on that totem pole. But in the eyes of the law, yeah, man, you're fine. And she says here in this section, I think,
Well,
on to yes, please.
yeah, and well, just to add a comment on that, that it works against you in that sense, because well, you're just equal under the law, so you don't deserve any protection, and people kind of rally that argument
You're
to
already
say
getting all the protection we can give you, right? It's like,
you have as much, you should get as much as I do, the boss
yeah,
who has a nice car and a yacht and stuff.
yeah, you have the opportunity to buy a car. You just need the money. Like we're the same. I just have more money because I work hard, right? I mean, again, this is the same garbage we hear today on a daily basis. Yeah, so then there's this line in this third paragraph. I have the line here. She says this was not the and by this she's talking about inflation in this time. Just the 1600s to 17th century, beginning of it, very in the beginning of it. She says, or this is the 16. No, sorry, this is, well, maybe I should just read the whole paragraph. Again, this moving in time and place destroys me. The price revolution also triggered a historical collapse in the real wage comparable to that with, did we say what price revolution was?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, okay, let me say what price revolution is. That's just that first paragraph of the price revolution and pauperization. This inflationary phenomenon, which due to its devastating social consequence has been named the price revolution, was attributed by contemporaries and later economists, e.g. Adam Smith, to the arrival of gold and silver from America, pouring into Europe through Spain in a mammoth stream. But it has been noted that price had been rising before these metals started circulating through the European market. Oh, this is, folks, I hope we've said this before. I remember this idea that all this primitive accumulation, especially from outside of Europe, brings this crash, brings this enormous inflation, because now you have all these precious metals suddenly sitting there.
Yeah,
and you
and that's
can't
what
really do much with it.
that's what like the story I've heard, or the history I've heard. Yeah, because in the previous section, she said prices had been stagnant for 200 years, but then they began to rise.
Yeah.
And she's saying, well, people say it's because of all this gold and silver, but she goes on to say, well, they've been rising before, and that gold and silver aren't capital.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been put to other uses. So she's just rejecting that claim.
So you're saying, oh, okay, because the prices have been going up. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
And because gold and silver aren't capital by themselves.
Right, and yeah, I mean they have some effect on prices, but David Graeber's makes that claim too, because he says all the silver actually ended up in Chinese markets. Like they didn't stay too long in Europe because Europeans weren't using money, using credit, and some other stuff. So where I take, okay, yeah. So Morgan themselves go and so you said that part. Blah, blah, blah. Maybe you want to continue. Maybe you have this part.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is in the last.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, she says, well, at the end, I just want to skip to the end where she said, in other words, prices rose not because of gold, but because of the development of a national and international market system, encouraging the import of agricultural products, and because merchants hoarded goods to sell them later at a higher price. Yeah,
I see. So she wants to say that it was the maturation of the mercantile system into an international, developing into an international system. I mean, it had been developing, right, folks? We've been doing trade with each other forever, but yeah, the way they've been and it was being managed, that's what's responsible for this price revolution. Okay, yeah, I buy that, but I guess what's important for us is, of course, the mass kind of hunger that it brings, that is lasting for so long here.
Yeah, and also she does say the merchants hoarded goods too to sell them at a later price,
right,
as being a factor in this.
Yeah, weird that it's not the invisible hand that's moving the market. It's just real people doing dumb, like evil shit.
Supply or demand doing this. Yeah, and I thought of that. I thought of recent times when people were hoarding some items like toilet paper and masks and things.
I mean, on the market system,
And
right? I
there's-
mean, there was a wonderful text from, it wasn't Rohana, forget what it was, tweet from a congressman, on a progressive congressman. It was like, look, all these corporations made bank over COVID, all of them, right? Like, we did not stop buying, like every money from the state and we all just started spending like crazy. They all made like 30, 40% profit, from all of them, big ones especially. So inflation is not this idea that, oh, there is, I mean, yes, some of it is there's a disturbance in the flow of capital because of the supply chains, right? Well, we got stuff, we're buying them, we're fine. And of course, it's not government spending, no, because they're eating all the prices. It's just a decision by corporations to raise prices. Why? Because there's money, because they can squeeze you. I mean, it's not a fucking conspiracy. It's not a secret. It's, they raise their prices. I mean, like, we don't have to pretend like there's a magical, thing at work here that we need to, uber mathematicians and supercomputers to figure it out.
Yeah, then it would make it, then that's what they want you to think. Then it becomes too powerful to fight against.
Of course.
Yeah, and I wanted to say too that hoarding isn't. It is a very mercantile thing to profit, or even very small businesses, because those corporations weren't hoarding things. And Marx talks about this too, right? With the dragons hoarding wealth, and the rich aren't hoarding anything. They have a lot of disposable wealth, conspicuous consumption. They're trading. That's the people like hoarding the toilet paper were, small beans compared to whatever these
dude, hoard all the fuck you want. We'll turn all the
Nancy
trees in the
Pelosi and all these
goddamn.
people.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's
A lot of money.
You got to think like internationally about those problems, especially these
But
corporations.
every once in a while, we see memes like that. People complaining that the rich are hoarding their wealth, and you just share it with us. It's not that.
No.
Elon Musk isn't sitting on a big pile of money like Scrooge McDuck.
He doesn't touch paper money. Like, there's no bank account. Like, these are got to be the type of things that are not taxable, or taxable in a very easy way, right? Like financial entities, right? That 99% of the world doesn't even understand. Like, yeah, it's dead, but then we cut this dead, we mix it with another dead, then we bet on that thing, then we put it. Yeah,
Alchemy,
that's as well. Yeah, it's a system that is like it's as unreal as it is.
Or English magic, something I don't really.
It's South African magic, guys. You gotta talk to Elon to get it, but it was developed by the British. Yes. Yeah. So I've written here. Then there is this. I've seemed to have gone into this state intervention here. I don't think I'm missing anything. 174. No, I am missing some stuff. Yeah, so there's this state is working against this hidden hand. There's inflation. The hidden hand here is the market, but actual decisions in the market, not some weird mechanism. And there is a lot of hunger, and there is a drop in real wages because of that inflation. And then the states intervene in order to keep this kind of arrangement going. And you have this people that are outside of the urban area urban areas they're being pushed towards a city, right? Because yes, there's hunger happening there, there's inflation happening within this city state, but it's much worse. So there's this move towards there, and then there's this change in work, which I wrote here in three parts. There needs to be this new and disciplined workforce. There is a diffuse in social protests. You have to crack down on these, and then there is this idea of a job, this thing that you do for long periods of time, for that is uniform for longer amount of your lifetime. You just become committed to it. I don't know. I don't have anything up until that subsection, James, that stated.
Yeah, neither do I. I just wanted to, well, just one thing. And on my page 80, it says, she's talking about the food revolts. And she says, it was the women who usually initiated and led the food revolts, 6 of the 31 food riots in 17th century France, studied by Yves Marie Barreau, were made up exclusively of women. In the others, the female presence was so conspicuous that Barreau calls them women's riots. Commenting on this phenomenon with a reference to 18th century England, Sheila Rowbotham concluded that women were prominent in this type of protest because of their role in families as their families' caretakers. But, and I think this is Federici coming in and refuting that, or trying to saying, but women were also the most ruined by high prices for having less access to money and employment than men. They were more dependent on cheap food for survival. This is why, despite their subordinate status, they took quickly to the streets when food prices went up, or when rumor spread that the grain supplies were being removed from town. So yeah, like you have this explanation for this that rests on, oh, they're caretakers, they're caregivers, this is in their nature to kind of care. But then Federici comes back and says, no, look, they have a stake in this. This affected their bread and butter, their daily lives. That's why they were there.
Real material existentialist pull on your, which kind of overcomes every other barrier.
Which I think could be instructive to us, like leftists now, or at least those people trying to organize and get people. You don't need to talk about these like, oh, you're a caring person, they may help, but I think really kind of focusing on the kind of root problems.
Yeah.
Particularly where workers, and the majority of which in America are very conservative. There's a lot of conservative, like working class people.
Yeah, that's very true. And sometimes you just wonder. I mean, in France, I can see it, yeah, but in the United States, sometimes it becomes like, how much shit are you guys going to actually take? I mean, this inability of Amazon workers to unionize, and they put so much effort, but the systems of Amazon of like rotating these people, don't let them come together, even like bounce against the laws, how much you interfere with the efforts of unionization. Sometimes you just can't overcome them, but you sure shit can stop going to work, but then you starve to death, and you would get kicked out of your home, and it's not always easy to find another work, and these fucking guys, of course, talk to each other.
There's no frontier to go to.
Yeah, and but at the end of the day, there's no solidarity. There's no feeling of safety. Like union membership in the United States, like just goes down, and now it's at like 6 or 7%. Like it's awful. And those unions are just like extensions of fucking the HR at the place you work, right? They're just there to keep the peace.
And
of
a lot
course,
of them
we're not
are
shitting on all of them.
Government government jobs or in some way.
Yeah, and after Janus case, of course,
And working
governmental
with
unionization became a lot more, and that was Janus was what 5, 6, 7 years ago, whatever, right? Like, hey, now you can't collect dues from everyone; it just has to be consenting, but you have to protect everyone since you're getting the contract to be the only union here. So yeah, I mean, there's all this, but I'm hopeful. There's a lot of kind of micro unions going. We'll see if those peter out or turn into new things. But yeah. I want to read
I
this.
think
That is very
Starbucks.
sorry.
Starbucks is unionizing, or there's more Starbucks unions forming.
Yeah, and I'm hearing things about Tesla unionizing, which is great.
Yeah,
But
let 1,000 unions blossom.
let a thousand unions blossom, especially in fucking Silicon Valley, but everywhere. Please, let's go. Just do it to piss off your boss, man. Um, the second part here that's very related to what you're reading, and this is from the paragraph that starts with the struggle for food. This sixth line here from the top, she says, not surprisingly, food crimes loom large in the disciplinary procedures of the 16th and the 17th centuries. Exemplary is the recurrence of the theme of the diabolical banquet in the witch trials, suggesting that feasting on roasted mutton, white bread, and wine was not considered a diabolical act in the case of the common people. Um, yeah, that's that. I was listening to this guy who had done like a survey of all these witch trials, especially the ones in the United States. He was talking about, this is the picture we use for this podcast, which is from the movie Witch, where Satan is asking this girl, "Would thou like to live deliciously?" Which is, of course, a quote from the Bible. Very fascinating section. But leaving that aside, the guy was like, the director was like, I was reading these things and they always like go to these kids and the women and they're like, okay, so why did you assist the witch or why did you partake in this like ritual? Of course they hadn't done that in any real sense we talk about, but confessions and psychological phenomena live all that aside. So when they would say yes to these crimes, it would always say, why did you do it? Oh, uh, they offered me eggs, shoes, bacon, meat, milk, a lot of milk. So he was always like, hey, man, like I was really fucking hungry. I've been walking around with no shoes on. And I don't know. I made a deal, and it's of course like dreams induced by, ridiculous poverty, on the outskirts of Massachusetts, living in these communities. But yeah, so this again rings through with the little scholarship of that I know from this era, like how these kind of associations are made. Um, yeah, poverty specifically. Okay, yeah, so that's that. And I read that. That takes care of that. Then we mentioned the state intervention. So there is this kind of centripetal move between in and out of the cities. We've been talking about that since the earlier chapter of this. And she says here, in that subsection, one, two, three, fourth paragraph, sixth line down, she says pauperization, rebellion, and the escalation of crime are structural elements of capitalist accumulation, as capitalism must strip the workforce from its means of production to impose its own rule. So part of the development of these historical preconditions are, as Marx puts it in Green Reset here, is the so these people they're constantly trying to kind of come together, find out the modalities of living, use whatever there is, land, stuff, material things, and sometimes they're just trying to survive. Sometimes they're going to towns looking for work. and they're becoming more and more captured in these codifications of law, and usually in antagonistic way, right? Not as a form of okay, now we will assist you in your endeavors, but now we're going to oppress you even more after. So whicher economic oppression follows legal oppression, which again is a beautiful kind of vestige of our history that we've kept, if nothing else. As you know, I talked to Sean, who's now a lawyer, like just raining hell on cops, and yeah, I mean, just talking about people that go to court, man. Just poor people. Hey, man, why did you steal food from Walmart? I'm sorry, this is $6 sandwich. Why did I steal it? I was hungry. Why did I steal this drill from this, you know, mega $1 billion Home Depot? Because I was gonna sell it to buy some food and some drugs because I live on the streets, and all other sources of pleasure are close to me. I live outside of your society. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
And these problems are
Yeah.
produced.
Yeah, I have a ton. I have a, you know, I can say a lot on that, but I'm
Please.
trying to think of the name of a book. But just about I haven't read about the origins of policing, but I think it's good. But the other one that I have read is the new Jim Crow.
Yeah.
But it talks about this
Shel
more so about
Alexander.
the U.S. about the slave patrols becoming the police force and kind of combining with these worker patrols to create the modern kind of police force.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're right that, and you know, because you always see like police TV shows where they're like gonna jump in front of a bullet or stop a murder or solve a crime, but in reality, mostly it's these kind of property crimes or you know, just this kind of defense of property as a concept.
Oh
And yeah, and
yeah.
I think it gets even worse. Reading a book called, or I read a book called by Robin Wong, Carceral Capitalism, that it becomes even more that this become a kind of debt farming from people, and the police are the enforcers of this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge it's a huge form of kind of revenue. And I mean, you can't pull money out of poor people, so you pull
You
it
can't
out of everyone
run
around
out of
them
time. Yeah.
and the state, and also you create jobs. But this is true, a lot of people don't notice. I mean, in America, of course, but in law school, like some you learn immediately that like police force is something very recent, and its recency kind of merges with property and development of slavery,
Mhm.
which is also bleeds into working. But yeah, like there were these sheriffs that would go, they would round up people to execute certain
Yeah, get a posse together.
yeah, it's basically a mom.
And I think sheriffs can still do that, deputize random people.
Of course.
Yeah, and you're right on the basic level that, you know, not like the whole carceral capitalism thing, but like if you look at, you know, someone robbing a 7-Eleven, like how I don't know how much they're getting, a few $100, maybe maybe $1,000. The amount this police
I
spend
doubt
to
they keep more than 200
enforce
bucks.
that, yeah, the amount the police spend to respond to that is way more. Even in bank robbery, police
Oh my
are,
God,
you know, police
James.
budgets are enormous, you know.
Then you have to have a court case. Then you have to bring these people, and you come here, and then you get evidence, and then lawyer, and this. It's like this whole shebang. I mean, Sean always says. I mean, it's just not. You know, it's not like a mystery to you and I. You don't need Sean to tell us what we know, but it's kind of like when you're hearing and seeing it, up like, oh my God, like the, you know, Walmart. Like you have more money than God. Like is if you put it like a free sandwich out outside, or like just like give your shit away, it
Yeah,
just
I would
seems
go to Walmart
absurd.
with more money, possibly.
Also, all this shit is fucking insured, man. Like you work shit jobs, you know, all this
But
shit is insured.
there's also the symbolic or psychological,
Well, that's all
ideological.
that is. It's a
Like
form of
there's no
discipline.
alternative to working. You can't make your money off Walgreens. You got to do something else. Uh, and
Yeah,
that's to put the fear into anyone else who's going to try it.
exactly. Yeah, it becomes like an ethical model. It's like, well, yeah, we have this certain fetishism of property law in this country, blah blah blah. We enforce it, but then you're like, okay, but there was no lawsuit. Like, this is insured. This is $6. This item was going to be thrown out in 2 hours anyways because you have to throw your food out. Blah 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 blah. So it is a symbolic gesture of punishment for fuck all, and it's absurd that. Okay, I'm not gonna get worked up over this, but yeah. Anyway, so here it is, and we're in this section, and we were kind of moving to this proletarian arrival. But she says something here in the this paragraph, and this is the next paragraph that I just read. I line bunch of stuff here because she's putting out some methodological frameworks. She says, and I'll read this 3 paragraphs. Unfortunately, I think they're important. She says, should I not? All right, I'll start from the first. So she says here, in the 19th century, proletarian misery and rebellion did not come to an end. They only lessened the degree that the super exploitation of workers had been exported. Through the institutionalization, thank you, of slavery at first, and later through continuing expansion of colonial domination. And we've already mentioned all this. As for the transition period, this remained in Europe a time of intense social conflict, providing the stage for a set of state initiatives that, judging from their effect, have 3 main objectives. And I've read those objectives already. In pursuit, and moving on, in pursuit of social discipline, an attack was launched against all forms of collective socially and sociality and sexuality, including sports, games, dance, ale wakes, festivals, and other group rituals that had been a source of bonding and solidarity among workers. It was sanctioned by a deluge of bills, 25 in England, just for the regulation of alehouse, in the years between 1601 and 1606. I know we started in the 19th century when I started reading, and then we went to the 16th century. But these characteristics of the what is to become the worker are holding constant. Yeah, James, the rest of that section is historical examples, and I moved on to population decline. I don't know if you have anything to say up until that.
Yeah, well, it just makes me think about what she's talking about. The attempts to impose a more productive use of leisure time. What is it? Alfie Bound, Candy Crush, and
Oh
capitalism
yeah,
argues that
from
these
Zero Books.
distractions aren't really going against your boss. They're just making you a more productive worker when you jump back into it. Which really, yeah, it makes me think we should, like you're saying, form a union to piss off your boss, but do some kind of leisure that pisses off your boss, or how do we take back leisure, our own leisure time?
First union
Yeah.
put forth in your first meeting, put forth that we only work 3 days a week. Yeah, I don't. I mean, those are the good kind of tactical questions to ask. I mean, yeah, I mean, then there's the kind of the Candy Crush problem is that yes, you are becoming a more intensified worker by pretending to go on this kind of little resistance excursion, but you're also making Candy Crush, selling your behavior to them without knowing it, right? Then you sign up to Reddit or Facebook, sell. You're not selling. You're just giving away your. They're making fun they're making money off your data, with your interaction. So either way, like even in your leisure, you're being exploited, which makes it very difficult. It makes everything very difficult.
And it started here where they're trying to control not just the workers' working time, but the very reproductive, the rest of the leisure time, the workers' time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and shaping it to kind of suit their own ends. Makes me think of that old political poster that was for the 8 hour work week. It was like 8 hours of my time, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours of work.
Yeah, right, right.
And then in the future, when they start putting ads in our dreams or making us, I don't know, give them data while we're sleeping somehow.
Playing video games, yeah. Well, yeah, sure. I mean, we are doing that while we're sleeping, right? With like Apple Watches and stuff, they all now have like, oh, let me help you track your sleeping. I'll give you something, but it's yeah. What I'm getting out of you is a lot more.
Yeah, and I think
valuable.
that's something that's happening too. What like biometrics? I don't know what you would call it or what it's called, but this kind of idea that you need to kind of track everything in your body all the time and know what all of your levels are constantly,
Right.
counting
And
your
you can't
steps.
do anything with that information to improve your life, right?
Well, you feel maybe it gives people a sense of they have a better sense of control of their life.
Yeah, it's a false sense. I mean, it's because like your
Information.
organs and your thoughts are the last frontier, right? Like once you've gave ground on everything else, right? You live a world that is 200% alienated. All you have to do is like take account of like navel gazing, right? Did I understand, a critique of your reason, right? Or, is my gallbladder, too big? You just have to like just stare into yourself and take account.
Yeah, that makes me think of something, and it makes me wish Mark were here because I'm
Yeah.
probably better grasp of it, or he has an interest in it, at least. Zhuangzi, Taoist philosopher who has a parable about a tree, a gnarly, gross tree that no one wanted to use for wood and cut down. He was like, kind of, be like, this tree is useless, but that uselessness protects it. And I always thought like that's the perfect philosopher, someone who looks so useless to any practical problems that no one comes after him or her.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's this, and that's a very good kind of segue into this population decline, economic crisis, and disciplining of women, right? Because now we're going to kind of touch upon the Caliban and the witch, and we're kind of getting into those figures that are repulsive to this prior process of primitive accumulation, right? I mean, not only useless to them, but antagonistic to it. Yeah. So I wrote here. I just summarized some stuff. A couple of these readings. I wrote from the 16th to 17th century marks devastating population decline in the Americas and the surrounding world, lack of reproduction, and 17th century disturbance in the world systems. And that lack of that population decline, of course, I'm mentioning this encounter between the conquistadors and the colonial arrivals in the Americas and the islands, and they were already in Africa, but more so, but especially in the Americas, there's a huge population decline, especially with the natives. And we talked about this last time, and I'm really glad she covered that. And there's this, which leads to a lack of reproduction for people, even at home. And then she says that against Foucault, actually, she says that while Foucault like starts biopolitics in this decline, this century of decline, which kind of compels this yet and still developing state to be like, okay, we got to do something about this population because we need labor and reproduction, as we've been talking about. The polity needs people. And she says that Foucault didn't kind of zoom in a little more and see what was up with the kind of the two sexes under this compulsion. And she goes on to claim that there's a proliferation of mercantilism and population explosion and codification of reproduction into criminal code. So I'm just collapsing those together because what I read latter comes because of this biopower that works. But she wants to also say, and I'll rest after this, I further argue that the intensification of prosecution of witches, a new disciplinary method that the state adopted in this period to regulate procreation and break women's control over reproduction, are also to be traced to this crisis. The population decline crisis. Yeah, I don't know if she had something to add or.
No. It just seems that this new kind of economic system was coming about, putting people in new social relations, but really not thinking about the kind of economic, or I mean ecological kind of impact of this, and it turned into diseases. Well, it caused in Europe a lot by, and then spread to the Americas by these kind of conditions they were living in tight quarters in cities, and
And like
developing.
you live on like mine lands that are completely toxic, and she was talking about that, right?
Yeah, and the natives, I mean, the Native Americans were very hygienic and much cleaner than the Europeans that came over, but that still didn't help them because they had no resistance to it.
Yeah. Just immediately fall through. Yeah,
And
and she
then,
talked.
something has to happen. They're like, well, this is not working. We need to think this through. And it's always seems to be how capitalism encounters ecological problems, like messing things up and being like, oh, well, we'll just kind of come in more with more control over it. So like the environment, what we need is not like to kind of back away and stop this kind of accumulation of wealth that's causing these problems. We need more products, more capitalism come in, and more control and breaking down and
right, which kind of makes the problem worse.
Sense. And
yeah, that's and right, and then in that sense, you also the state starts seeing kind of their power as their city population, and how and their density and productivity within spaces. And she says here that this is a time when you also start to see women emerge, and James and I touched on this, as legal subject, because now they have to be regulated through law. And there's a refinement of norms and traditions and previous modalities of law that are becoming more refined. And then, for example, she says here, in the case of both infanticide and witchcraft, the statutes limiting women's legal responsibilities were lifted. Thus, women walked for the first time into the courtrooms of Europe in their own name as legal adults under charge of being witches and child murderers. Then she skips it. Then I'll skip to the next paragraph here. She says, with the marginalization of the midwife, and the midwife, of course, is a form of occupation or wage occupation in the city. The process began by which women lost the control they had exercised over procreation and were reduced to a passive role in child delivery, while the male doctor came to be seen as the true givers of life, as the alchemical dreams of the Renaissance magicians. With this shift, a new medical practice also prevailed, one that in the case of medical emergency prioritized the life of the fetus over that of the mother. This was in contrast to the customary birthing process, which women had controlled. And indeed, for it to happen, the community of women that had gathered around the bed of the future mother and had to be first expelled from the delivery room. And midwives had to be placed under the surveillance of the doctor or had to be recruited to police women. And then, of course, then there's this, this idea of women are used against each other, but there is this kind of crucial shift, which is which was just, with these 2 sessions we've been doing this, you're just seeing like this constant show of resistance by women, but there's a stark decline. Things are in decline.
Yeah, because the forces against them are just trying to destroy this source of knowledge, wisdom, of practices, because they're, like I said, like we were talking about earlier, that they're kind of having to put this new system in due to the population crisis, but they have to get rid of the old. And just that, I was just thinking too how it's framed as this kind of progress, and we're now more civilized. But now
the women are more free because you're not tied to the land.
Yeah, you're more free, but also there's witches. We need to take them to court. Like, this kind of contradictory feeling there.
Yeah.
And women were, like we've been talking about every time, like women were understood reproduction in ways that
they've been doing it for a long time.
That work, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if did she talk about here? Did you mention it, or
what exactly?
Well, the midwives are a lot more capable and more
Oh yeah. No, I was reading it. Yeah.
Too, than the male doctors.
Oh, of course, because I mean they're not understanding it, and we were and this these are kind of problems that we're still dealing today, right? I mean, these are some of these things are just changing. Like, I had women having to go to gynecologists that were mostly men, if not all, right? I mean, especially for our parents' generations, and your people that have a textual, technological, taxonomical approach to the human body. I mean, they're not necessarily evil. They're just the social role that they're playing is incompetent, right? Where you had these kind of traditions, and not all of them were scientific, but there was this kind of a gradual development of approach to women's health and women's body in those specific situations. Of course, there were also bad things that were happening. This is not a romanticization, but it's just a fact, right? The intimacy of knowledge with the body, it is different.
And that policing of women by the women definitely reminded me of Second Sex.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she talks about that more, how midwives became spies for the state, and the crime of infanticide became much more enforced.
Yeah.
And then she writes, the outcome of these policies that lasted for 2 centuries, women were still being executed in Europe for infanticide at the end of the 18th century, was the enslavement of women to procreation.
Yeah.
Whereas before they had contraceptives, and this is, unfortunately something that is still kind of with us, the Roe versus Wade.
Not only is with us, we're going the other way again.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly you and I talking earlier in our undergrad, talking to me about something that Zizek had said. So I have to have a contract. I have to say that name. But you were talking about,
I just quote Zizek when I'm walking around all the time.
Yeah, you were telling me you're like, that there are some struggles that a progressive society ought not constantly revisit, right? You're talking about, it's like, yes, free speech, but we can't sit here and like every 20 years like debate slavery anew,
Yeah.
right? It's like it's not as empowering as democratically valorant as you make it seem. Like you have to move on, man. Like, yeah, at some point you have to be like, okay, like there are gay people. We
Nazis are
have them in
bad.
our family. Nazis are bad. Like we can't. But we're going backwards, like in a frightening speed. Um,
Yeah,
James,
like
yeah,
there should be a kind of ratcheting or like clink. Okay, we got past that one.
yeah,
Now
you
let's move
can't
on.
go back on that.
Can't go back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just makes me think of like Boghossian and all those people who are classical liberals
Oh
who
yeah.
openly think for debate in a kind of Lockean or whatever one of those guys manner.
Yeah.
But Locke was a
Yeah.
social.
I mean, the reactionaries like Boghossian, of course, they're always sad about some unknown history that nobody else wants to go back to if it's real, right? Um, from there on,
We'll have to do another episode where we talk about those chuds. Or
oh,
not we talk about James Lindsay, Boghossian, all those people.
yeah, Sean and I made 3 episodes kind of on that, but I would love to. I will talk shit on those people like for a living if I could. Like the amount of hate I have in my heart for Boghossian, and that fucking
You know my thing with them. Got all the inside.
yeah, no, I mean we're on the same page on this. And James Lindsay like worse. I mean, he's like just
Well, yeah, I'll just say the funniest thing to me is that James Lindsay is so popular, and Boghossian is probably like mad because it's this guy that came from him and got super popular, and he's getting all the Twitter followers.
yeah. Just it's funny because that's what I always tell Sean. I'm like, Boghossian was even a fuck up in this grifting economy, right? Because like every one of these Peterson stuff, he was in a university in a liberal place. He had the same tired grievances that nobody wanted to hear, but they made it. He did not. You.
It makes me think of something a professor in grad school said to me, that you can't be a mediocre philosopher and be a successful academic philosopher. I'm a mediocre philosopher and it's fine. You can't be a mediocre great reader. Boghossian has nothing to offer the economy there.
No,
Lindsay was like, I'll just be racist. And
I'll say anything. That's how
yeah,
you got to go.
the
Yeah.
other ones have their own little things, and Boghossian is just like, I'm the philosophy one, but they all pretend to be philosophers.
Oh,
That's
of course, even
doing that.
Peterson. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, you gotta you gotta really like Peterson like went into the like the I don't know like the Canadian equivalent of Parliament or whatever. No, it was like it was a policy hearing. He was like talking about how tomorrow gonna be knocking on doors and like arresting you unless you say I love
Gender's they.
transgender. Yeah. You have to know
You're
the
a Z. You're a
exact
Z.
number of all the genders, and you got to know them, and you got to
I'm not a
recite them
Lizzie.
every morning in front of TV as Joe Biden watches you. Like he's. We'll do an episode on these motherfuckers if you want to do.
Yeah, I was thinking Lindsay has a new book out about critical theory, and I read a review of it. He just kind of quotes it and it says, look, isn't this crazy? It doesn't refute it at all. That might be a good one to read because it's mostly good authors and less
Yeah,
James.
that would be awesome. I'll be really into that. Kind of diving into the dark minds of the IDW, whatever is left of it. Yeah, then in as for here, I moved into this Marx argument. Did you want to read, or is it good, or should we stop, or what do you think?
Maybe we should, how many pages left in the chapter? It's still a while to go. Yeah, maybe we should.
We should stop.
There's another section.
Yeah, I feel like if we're gonna do good, and I have to like have like 4
Yeah, we're
minutes.
already going off on a tangent with Bogosian. We're gonna be all fired up thinking about that guy.
I know, I'm just can't see under here. I just got a big. Okay, you're a teacher. I can't say stuff like this. A big chocolate that I'm excited to eat after this podcast. Okay, yeah. Because I want to talk about, because that her kind of contention with Marx. Of course, Marx is my daddy. I get just very offended, and I really want to dive into that. But then we can do a lot, because now we're moving into the like type of history we know, which is like modern history. So yeah, let's stop here, and I'll put a note here that this is where we stopped. I didn't know this book was going to be so. I mean, it's not easy to understand. It's just a lot of information. Okay, yeah. Well, cool, James. We got to it, and next time we'll finish this chapter, and we'll do it. We'll do it with Mark here, which would be good. I really want to kind of dive into this Mark stuff, which is why I'm reading this, and talk about some of these epochs and Bacon's rebellion and stuff, and go deeper in that. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything to plug? Any?
Well, I was thinking what I could start doing. I have a little corner at the end here where I plug science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction books that are philosophical or political.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't talked about on my podcast because no one's read them with me. Yeah, and I should have chosen this before, but I think I talked about this one last time. Vagabonds by Hao Jing Fong. It's pretty cool. Mars. It's pretty long, but it's interesting because the author has an economics degree, so she kind of pits Earth and Mars as the kind of Earth seen as what Chinese people see America as, and Mars as what Chinese people see or what Americans see Chinese people as, but not quite exactly their economic features, because Mars is a very kind of closed economy, very collective. Earth is very like just extrapolated capitalism from now, but worse, very open, free market kind of society.
Yeah.
And you have these kind of just clashes, but you have this group of children that were born on Mars but lived on Earth, and they're very kind of like torn. And it really does like spend a lot of time like, or the characters thinking about like, what are the advantages of this? How can we combine these two systems to make a better system than either one?
Kind of reminds me of the Dispossessed, like when there are these planets when they're on economies, and then there's like these conversations, but there's no talk of people combining in that, I guess.
No, and I think
Like,
and I think Le Guin's different there because she's like definitely on the side of one side politically.
anarchist side.
I think the author of that book is like really kind of, considering with that, not using it as an example to say like, look how bad this one is.
Right.
Benefits of that.
And
And I wouldn't want to live in a society that's like super collectively closed, because people there have no real kind of ability, like we talked about with this book and with Marx, that people, like what's Marx's quote, like a person is supposed to be like a fisher in the morning, like a kind of a farmer in the afternoon, then a woodworker in the later day, and this and that, not just be one thing. And that's
right.
what ends up happening on Mars in this system that's ostensibly very socialist, but because it became so rigid,
Oh, it became a
And
closed
people
society.
want like, yeah, the people want some kind of influx or something that can kind of open things up for people, give people more mobility.
Yeah, I like that. Actually, I might have it like an Audible credit coming up soon. I might actually read that. But yeah, I mean, I told you I'm reading The Expanse, and which I really like, and I like the show. But there is the like the Belters. I'm really attracted to the idea of. Yeah, I mean the other planets kind of exploit the Belters because they're in the belt and they're getting all the minerals and water. There's also good place for transportation and stuff like that. But then Marcus in the later books rises out of there. He's very brutal, but he's also justified because he's been under slavery. So um but unfortunately the book is a bit lib, it always kind of steps back as soon as it entertains interesting stuff. So
Yeah, I I love that show. I haven't read the books. I've been meaning to. Um, they're just I can never find them for like I don't know. And yeah, the character of Marcus, I've been watching the show. I think it's a great show. I think it's probably one of the best sci-fi shows around and
yeah,
best capitalism shows around too.
definitely. Yeah.
But yeah, I hate how they do that with these characters that are like the left-wing radicals. It's like Killmonger, Marcus. It's like, yeah, I got some great ideas. Also, we gotta shoot some
Bane.
in the head for some reason, you know. It's like,
They just do weird shit. I mean, it's like they got goals. They're historically coherent, like Killmonger. It's like, hey, enough of this close society shit. You know what I mean? Like there was this like, oh, your closeness has pushed me to this. Like there's or Marcus. Like, what is Marcus? Like Marcus had no other option other than to fight and fight brutally. Um and yeah, or Bane that he has,
I,
he has this extra
yeah,
goal of like blowing up the city. Like, why? Like,
yeah.
why can the first part of the plan be the plan? Like, it doesn't make sense.
You could be trying to say, well, look, the propaganda of the deed, like violence is necessary, revolutionary violence is necessary, but they're not doing that. They're trying to say, I don't know, that
They're trying to like blow up the
don't
whole
use
world,
this
shit like that.
violence, or that this violence is. I mean, and we don't even talk about the systemic violence that is already occurring. That is, I mean, Marcus is throwing asteroids at Earth, but what kind of systemic violence
Yeah.
has been doing?
Look,
Like
and if
killing.
you want to say like systematic violence, communism, blah, 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 yeah, okay, Stalin. Yeah, he was a revolutionary for a long time, but by the time he's a statesman, by the time like 1930s rolling, he's not a he's not a revolutionary, he's a statesman. So you have a critique of like state violence by all means, but like when did like the killing is not being done by revolutionaries. Um, it's like, yeah, but anyways, we're
Yeah.
saying the same
So
thing,
like
but
when you're
that, yeah,
criticizing Stalin, you should look to, okay, well, what are other, what are other states doing then? If that's like a legitimate form of violence that could be enacted on people, then you have to look at, well, you can look at Germany in the 40s and 30s. Then you look at the US where
yeah,
they learned those techniques from.
yeah, literally, yeah. It becomes very absurd. Let me see. I wanna. We should always plug, right? Let's do a thing where we like plug a book. So I want to plug. So I'm really interested in kind of dialectic thinking as like an abstract form of thinking, but also as like a historical method. I think it's very interesting the way it pops up and how it's used. I really like this book by John Reese. I use it a lot. The Algebra of Revolution. It's basically a different modalities of dialectic thinking. Who came up with it? What was their purpose? What were their mistakes and shortcomings? It's just a wonderful meditation. Dialectical thinking has always been with us. Every society has it, and I think everybody should know about the modern manifestations of it because they pull you out of binary entertainment of propositions, right? Suddenly you have two rights and you have to be clever with it. So I will suggest that.
Yeah, and like in terms of this book, we have technology, but we have all these things that, and like this is more of a Marxist is take on it than maybe Federici, but we have all this technology, but we have all this misery too. How can we like draw on some of those like communal feudal like aspects, but keep the technology and go forward?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. I mean, it's the idea of like utilizing history, like this idea of history is not something that you just overcome and like then it becomes like you negate and over, right? It's you know, you and I specifically have had this discussion about that developmentalism, that kind of Piaget started thinking in human growth, right? Like your past life is not all shit. Like it's not just victory over yourself unto death, right? It's this idea that uh there are these kind of episodes that are overlapping, that are complex, that are real actual antagonisms, where or you could go either way, or it could turn into something new. And you have to really kind of meditate on those moments in your history, right? Like as Nietzsche said, I was speaking to someone a couple of days ago about this in eternal recurrence as an aphorism, right? He has this beautiful meditation regarding like, yeah, you like you reflect on your life and like, hey, is this the life you want to live for eternity? Every action, every moment, every second. That's the disposition we should have to our history, because it's not just other people's history, it's your history too. And there might be salvageable truths and movements from it that are useful. Like not everything is just like technology. It's like it's not working, guys. Like look looking around you. It's not. You can make this work. You can't just keep driving.
Yeah, it's too expensive.
And it's too expensive. I can't keep driving. Well, James, yeah, think about it if you want. I have this week off. I'm on break, but I'm writing 3 huge papers. But if you want to do Sunday, I can do an episode, and of course next week. Sunday we can do something else. But if you want to do that ethics of ambiguity, chapter 1. If you don't want to, I totally understand. There's so much existentialism someone can read. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the ambiguity. Just give me a straight up ethics. Give me a 1, 2, 3.
Ethics of concrete. Let's go. Yeah. Just the list of things. Like these are bad things, these are good things.
And it's just vague. It's like macaroni and cheese, bad. Like,
yeah, it's no answer. It just is. Yeah, that's what I like. It's very like exact examples.
But I can't say
yeah.
I've been doing something with my roommates that isn't intellectual at all. We're watching Spaceballs. So.
That's totally good. I'm gonna go smoke a bunch of weed and play some Fortnite and just forget planet exists. So
yeah, because I did try to do a movie night with my roommates to watch Solaris, the Tarkovsky movie, and no one took me up on it, so I just watched it by myself.
Oh, not the George Clooney version.
No.
Oh, okay. Because that remake is just
because I love Stanislaw Lem. I mean, I've been wanting to do a movie thing too. I've been wanting to watch Stalker, and there's
Stalker's
just Japanese movies like Quaiden that I want to watch on HBO. And Stalker, I have.
Yeah, HBO is doing some good stuff, right? Oh, there you go. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, let's talk about that. Maybe we'll do some movie episodes.
Film study.
I'm sorry.
Well, we should maybe watch the Witch after we finish the book. That would be cool.
Yeah, I fucking love, dude. Like, Witch. What was Midsummer's Hereditary? I love shit like this.
Yeah. My idea with the Witch, like what first struck me, but way before reading this book, was that it's about this kind of destruction of the family at the core, you know.
That family is literally falling apart as they're cast outside. Yeah.
Feminism being about the destruction of the family and the witch. And this book really kind of helps tie those things together with that movie.
Yeah, I've just like, like as soon as I chose that picture, yeah, but I've been reading it. It's like it's a lot, and I think those political intentionalities are in the movie. I mean, if anything, in the end, there's this kind of a prevalence that affirms certain truths in it. So yeah, man, I would totally be down for like a kind of more of a cultural review episodes too. Yeah,
I took a film theory class.
Me too. I know what mise-en scene is.
Yeah. All about some Lacan would be fun.
Yeah. That would. Yeah, I would definitely read Lacan. I actually have a book that. Yeah.
And
anyways, I'll tell you.
Deleuze has a book on film too, I think.
Of course.
Or maybe, yeah, which I've heard is good.
That would be cool. Except we won't know any of the movies.
Yeah.
Maybe we could watch those in this day.
Le Jeté, it's a short French film that became 12. That was kind of turned into or used to make 12 Monkeys with Bruce Willis.
Oh.
It's a time travel film.
I did not know that. 12 Monkeys.
Not that travel in time is short. The whole film is short, It's not just a short in time.
It's like a short movie. Okay. Yeah. Cool, James. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful. We'll finish this chapter next week. But yeah, I'll see you.
Bye.
Bye, y'alls.